Hi guys, what does it feel like to stand at the gates of an empire that once claimed to be eternal, only to find its walls softened not by armies or famine, but by smoke curling from a single poppy flower? You're about to find out. You step into the early 19th century Qing Dynasty, when China still imagines itself the center of the world. The Forbidden City gleams under the soft wash of morning sun. Court officials scurry in silken robes, their hats adorned with colored beads that tell you exactly how important they think they are. Outside those walls, the streets stir awake. Vendors chopping vegetables, donkeys stamping their hooves, printers pressing ink onto paper, filled with poetry, gossip, and bureaucracy in equal measure. You walk slowly, letting the air thicken with detail. The scent of frying dumplings follows you, mixed with wood smoke from stoves that have been burning since before dawn. Somewhere nearby, a scholar is already lecturing a group of bleary-eyed students on the 4 books of Confucius. You pause, amused, because this sounds suspiciously like the morning commute podcast you tried to listen to once, except with more bowing. The Qing Empire, in this moment, feels strong, unshakable. The population is vast. Nearly 1/3 of the entire planet's humans live under these dragon banners. The land stretches from icy Mongolian steppes down to lush rice paddies, from deserts that whisper with wind to coastal harbors smelling of salt and fish. You sense that power, and yet you also feel the small cracks forming like hairline fractures in porcelain. They don't seem urgent, until one day the whole vase lies in shards. Here is a historical fact to ground you. The Qing Dynasty's tax system was still based on a fixed silver payment set centuries earlier. At first, this made peasants' lives predictable, but as the empire swelled, money ebbed, and trade shifted, the rigidity became brittle. Silver flowed out toward foreign merchants, and when a substance called opium began to take its place, the balance tipped. There's something almost absurd about it, isn't there? An empire toppled not by invading hordes, but by little brown clumps of dried resin smoked in bamboo pipes, a drug so popular it rivaled tea. And yet, here we are, an obscure tidbit. Some users of opium in China didn't just smoke it. They believed blowing the smoke into a child's face could cure illness, a folk remedy that today feels both sad and strangely reckless, like giving cough syrup to a cat. Historians still debate whether the imperial court fully understood the scale of the problem in its early decades. Some argue the mandarins turned a blind eye, enjoying their own private pipes. Others think the empire was simply too massive, too unwieldy to grasp the creeping addiction until it was too late. You probably won't make it through this day without feeling the heaviness of what's coming, but for now, the morning is still gentle. If you're enjoying this journey, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps keep this little corner of history alive and, hopefully, helps you drift off gently tonight. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love imagining this story unfolding across time zones. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You follow the curling smoke deeper into the empire's story, the quiet footsteps of decline already echoing behind the walls. You move down a narrow Beijing street, lined with shops and stalls, each competing for your attention with painted signs and loud voices. Men in long robes haggle over bolts of cloth. Women, faces half hidden by veils, carry baskets filled with vegetables. Children dart between legs like minnows, chasing each other with shrill laughter, and then you notice it. Behind one modest curtain, a faint scent unlike the others, sweet, heavy, like flowers left too long in a warm room. That is opium. You step closer, almost without intending to, the curtain parts, and you glimpse a room filled with low couches, pillows stacked like waves, and people reclining with glazed eyes. Pipes rest in their hands, thin trails of smoke climbing toward the ceiling beams. No one here is in a hurry. It feels less like a den of sin and more like a waiting room for people who've given up on time. One fact stands out. By the early 1800s, the British East India Company was funneling thousands of chests of opium into China every year. Officially, trade with foreigners was restricted to one port, Canton, but loopholes, bribes, and sheer determination made smuggling laughably easy. Think of it like trying to lock a single door in a house with 100 windows wide open. The empire's officials frowned, wrote stern memoranda, even banned the drug outright, and yet people kept smoking. Rich merchants, desperate peasants, even a few monks, who probably justified it as meditation with extra steps. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some Qing households used hollowed gourds as portable opium kits, carved with delicate scenes of mountains or plum blossoms, as if turning addiction into an art form made it somehow more respectable. The debate among historians continues. Was opium truly the single cause of China's decline, or merely a symptom of deeper structural flaws? Corruption, military stagnation, and population pressure all played their part. Perhaps opium was simply the spark that lit the haystack, or perhaps it was the haystack itself, quietly suffocating the empire from within. You sink into the imagery. The muted light, the slow breath of the smokers, the faint creak of the wooden beams above. It's oddly peaceful, until you remember that behind this haze is an entire nation quietly draining its silver reserves, weakening its armies, and letting foreign powers slip their fingers around its throat. And yet, for the people here, this moment is bliss, a pocket of stillness in a world that asks too much. You lean back in your own imagination, the weight of the pillow pressing against your shoulders, the scent tugging you between curiosity and unease. Outside, the city still bustles. Somewhere, a bell tolls. The empire turns. And you, drifting between centuries, wonder what it means when pleasure becomes poison, and when strength begins to look like surrender. The haze lingers in your clothes as you step back into the sunlight. Beijing's streets are loud again, the world outside that little room spinning as if nothing had happened. But you feel different. You've seen the quiet trap, hidden behind silk curtains and polite laughter. You've smelled the sweet smoke that clings tighter than any soldier's grip. And now, as you walk, you realize how ordinary people, merchants, students, shopkeepers, were beginning to carry this same heaviness in their pockets. One fact, by the 1830s, estimates suggest that as much as 1/10 of the adult male population of China was addicted to opium. Imagine that. 1 out of every 10 faces you pass on this very street is clouded, dulled, tethered to a pipe. You don't need an economics lecture to know what that means for an empire's productivity. The empire tried. Officials issued bans, punishments, and even staged public burnings of opium pipes. The irony, of course, is that many of those same officials were rumored to keep private stashes. It's the ancient equivalent of a politician swearing off fast food while hiding fries in their desk drawer. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some opium smokers developed an entire etiquette around sharing pipes. It wasn't just about passing the flame. There were rules. Who lit first? How long you inhaled? Whether you offered the pipe back with two hands. To fumble these steps was considered rude. A little like double dipping at a dinner party. Historians still debate whether addiction spread more through the wealthy elite or the working poor first. Some argue the rich set the fashion, turning it into a luxury habit before it trickled down. Others say the poor embraced it quickly as an escape from endless labor. The truth is probably both, layered like smoke in the rafters. As you continue down the lane, a group of scholars shuffle past you, their long sleeves brushing the air. They speak of trade, of silver disappearing into foreign hands. You catch a phrase, "The barbarians profit, and we bleed." It lingers with you. The empire is not yet crumbling, but you can feel the softness at its core. A dragon still, yes, but one that seems to be curling up to sleep. And in the quiet spaces where smoke drifts, the dragon dreams, while its rivals sharpen their knives. You step into a tea house, the clink of porcelain cups, the hiss of boiling kettles. Tea has always been China's proudest export, and yet, strangely, it will soon be tied forever to opium, the pairing of leaf and resin, pleasure and profit, east and west. You sip. It's bitter, earthy, grounding. Across the room, someone coughs, the wet cough of an opium smoker whose lungs are slowly folding in on themselves. No one looks up. They've all heard it before. And you, seated in the swirl of steam and conversation, realize this isn't just a story of drugs or trade. It's a story of what happens when an empire cannot, or will not, change. The next morning arrives. With a pale wash of light over tiled rooftops, you wander to the southern gate of the city, where carts rumble in from the countryside. Pigs squeal in wicker baskets, chickens squawk indignantly, and farmers unload vegetables stacked high like pyramids. The air smells of garlic and horse sweat. You inhale it deeply, grateful for the freshness. Anything to cut through last night's smoke. But the trade routes carry more than food. Hidden among sacks of grain and bolts of cloth are darker goods. Bricks of opium, carefully wrapped and disguised. Smugglers know the patrol schedules by heart. Bribes have already been exchanged. The empire's borders are vast, and corruption oozes through them like water through cracked stone. Here's one historical fact. The British East India Company grew opium in India, specifically in Bengal and Bihar, and shipped it to China in exchange for silver. That silver then circled back to London, funding tea purchases for the insatiable British public. So, every cup of tea sipped in a London parlor was, in some twisted sense, underwritten by an addict hunched in a Canton den. And here's a stranger tidbit. Some smugglers used hollowed bamboo poles to hide their shipments, carrying them like innocent walking sticks. Others tucked opium into the linings of clothing or even stitched it into dolls. The creativity of smuggling could almost earn applause if it weren't so tragic. Historians still debate whether the Qing Dynasty might have survived longer had it embraced a different approach to foreign trade. What if they had legalized opium early, taxed it, and redirected the profits into modernization? Would the dragon have stayed awake, or was the empire too bound by Confucian ideals, too rigid to bend before breaking? You follow the smugglers in your imagination as they drift toward the coast, where foreign ships bob like dark silhouettes against the horizon. The Canton system, that carefully controlled funnel of trade, looks less like a wall and more like a sieve. The foreigners grin, the empire scowls, and yet business hums along. A child tugs at your sleeve. He's selling candied hawthorn sticks, red and glossy, skewered on bamboo. You buy one, biting into the sweet sour fruit. The taste is sharp, grounding you in the moment. Around you, soldiers march past, their armor clinking, their spears polished. They look strong, disciplined, ready, but you know better. A soldier's strength means little when his officers are bribed, when his pay vanishes into the pockets of corrupt overseers, when the empire itself is distracted by smoke. The city wall looms behind you, ancient bricks stacked high, still formidable. But remember that vase with the hairline cracks? You see them here too, hidden in the mortar, waiting, and you walk on, candied fruit on your tongue, the rumble of trade carts in your ears, knowing the story has only just begun, and that you probably won't make it through this empire's long day without watching it stumble toward night. The road to Canton hums like a restless artery, carrying goods, gossip, and a quiet sense of unease. You join the caravan in your imagination, walking beside merchants in wide-brimmed hats and oxen dragging heavy carts. The air grows more humid as you travel south, the green of the landscape deepening into lush folds of rice paddies and banana groves. Cicadas drone endlessly, as if performing a soundtrack of irritation. At every inn along the way, you overhear talk of silver, silver going out, never coming back. Silver, once the empire's sturdy backbone, now trickling like sand through open fingers. The merchants blame the foreigners, the officials blame the merchants, and the peasants shrug, because they were broke long before opium arrived. Here's your anchor fact. Between 1821 and 1837, China's net outflow of silver ballooned. For centuries, silver had poured into China in exchange for tea, silk, and porcelain. Suddenly, the tide reversed, draining the treasury. The empire that once demanded tribute now bled treasure to fund its own undoing. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some coastal communities, seeing the new wealth opium brought to smugglers, began referring to opium boats with playful nicknames like ghost rafts. Children were told not to point at them, lest the spirits take notice, a superstition stitched out of economic despair. Historians still debate whether opium addiction itself directly crippled the labor force, or whether the silver crisis, magnified by opium, did most of the damage. Was the farmer too dazed to work his field, or simply too poor to buy seed? Was the empire's body weakened by smoke, or by starvation? The answer, like smoke, refuses to settle. Canton itself, when you finally arrive, is a fever dream of commerce. Junks crowd the riverbanks, their sails painted with symbols of fortune. Foreign ships loom farther out, their flags bright against the sea. Warehouses overflow with tea bricks, silk bales, and crates marked with chalk symbols you can't decipher. You hear English voices, nasal and loud, mixing with the lyrical tones of Cantonese. You also smell it, the same sweet, heavy scent you noticed back in Beijing. Here, it floats openly, as if the city has stopped pretending. Pipes clink against porcelain trays. Men lounge in shadowed corners. Coins change hands. The den is no longer hidden. It is everywhere. And as you walk through the streets, the thought creeps into your mind. The dragon is not being slain. It is being bought. One puff at a time, night falls over Canton like a velvet curtain. The lanterns along the Pearl River shimmer, their reflections stretching into trembling lines. You wander through the Foreign Factories District, the designated area where Western traders are confined. Each building is fronted with painted shutters and flags, like miniature embassies lined in a row. Here, the rules of the empire bend, but never quite break. The British are the loudest, their warehouses stacked with goods, their clerks scribbling furiously. The Americans are quieter, but their ships are no less bold. The Portuguese hum with familiarity, their colony at Macau close enough to be a back porch. The Dutch, the French, all jostle for space, sipping tea with one hand and hiding opium manifests with the other. One historical fact: under the Canton system, foreign merchants were not allowed to live freely in the city. They stayed in these factories, essentially dormitories mixed with offices. Every transaction had to pass through designated Chinese intermediaries called Hong merchants. In theory, this kept control firmly in imperial hands. In practice, it was like trying to dam a river with a bamboo fence. Now for something obscure. One of the social amusements foreign traders enjoyed in Canton was staging amateur operas. Imagine a group of stiff English clerks, powdered wigs slipping in the humidity, belting out songs from home, while outside the window, smugglers hauled crates of opium ashore. A clash of cultures, performed in falsetto. Historians still debate whether the Qing officials tolerated this foreign presence as a necessary evil, or saw it as a humiliating compromise. Was Canton a controlled gateway, or a breach in the wall? The records suggest both views, depending on which official you ask and how much silver lined his purse. You pause on the riverbank. The tide laps softly against the stone steps. A junk glides past, its red lanterns glowing like embers. On the deck, men laugh too loudly, their words slurring. You know that sound now. It is the laughter of smoke. Behind you, the warehouses creak with the weight of trade. Tea and silk leave, opium arrives. The cycle turns, relentless as the tide, and you, standing in the glow of lanterns, realize that this city, beautiful, bustling, alive, is also the fuse on a powder keg. The dragon sleeps fitfully, its dreams troubled, and somewhere across the sea, men in London sip their tea, oblivious to the fact that their comfort is bought with another empire's slow unraveling. You lean on the railing, the river breeze soft against your skin, and you know, you probably won't make it through this empire's long night without hearing the first cracks of thunder. Morning in Canton feels heavy, as if the air itself has soaked overnight in opium smoke and river mist. You wander through the crowded alleys near the docks, where hawkers call out in a dozen tongues, selling everything from ginger candy to carved ivory trinkets. The bustle is intoxicating. Sailors with tattoos stumble past, clerks in neat coats hurry toward the factories, and rickshaw pullers dart through gaps like arrows. But beneath the hum of trade, you sense the weight of surveillance. Qing officials in stiff robes stand at corners, eyes sharp, their ledgers tucked under their sleeves. They are here to enforce the rules of the Canton system, though everyone knows those rules are more elastic than bamboo. Here's your historical fact. In 1729, long before the crisis reached its peak, the Qing court actually banned the smoking of opium, though not the medicinal use of the drug. It was the first law of its kind, but enforcement proved laughably difficult. By the 1820s, the habit had spread so widely that the law seemed more like a polite suggestion than an imperial decree. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some Cantonese opera singers were rumored to smoke opium before performances, believing it helped them reach the long, trembling notes their audiences adored. Imagine a singer, his eyes half closed, balancing on stage as the music swells, his voice soaring on smoke. The line between art and addiction blurs. Historians still debate whether Qing corruption was a cause or a consequence of the opium trade. Did the bribes start the rot, or did the rot invite the bribes? The question feels almost circular, like trying to decide whether the haze in the air comes from incense or opium. It's both, mingled beyond separation. You find yourself drawn toward a tea house near the river. Inside, the chatter is lively, but every table holds the same undercurrent. Foreign trade, silver shortages, officials turning blind eyes. One man whispers of a commissioner rumored to be on his way. A stern figure said to despise the drug with all his being. His name flickers in the shadows. Lin Zexu. Outside, a gong sounds from a temple, low and resonant. Smoke from incense coils into the sky, mingling with the haze of pipes burning in hidden rooms. Canton breathes both prayers and poisons, both rituals and ruin. You sip your tea, bitter as always, and you feel the empire's pulse through the clatter of porcelain and the sighs of tired merchants. It's still strong, but not steady, not anymore. Night drapes itself over Canton, and the Pearl River becomes a mirror of lantern light. You stroll along the embankment, where foreign ships cast long silhouettes against the horizon. Their hulls are massive, their masts like forests of black lines etched into the night sky. On their decks, sailors laugh and sing, their voices carrying over the water. You pause at a warehouse, its doors half open. Inside, bales of tea sit in neat stacks, waiting to be shipped west. Each bale represents a craving, the endless British appetite for hot, leafy comfort. But tucked behind them, in darker corners, crates of opium wait silently, like wolves crouched behind sheep. One fact to steady you. By the late 1830s, Britain was importing over 30 million pounds of tea from China annually. The profits from this trade were staggering, but only because opium sales balanced the books. Without opium, Britain's addiction to tea might have bankrupted its merchants. Here's your obscure tidbit. Foreign sailors sometimes carved tiny models of opium pipes out of ivory or wood during idle hours, selling them as curios to locals. These miniatures, hardly larger than a finger, became prized trinkets. Children even played with them, oblivious to what they represented. Historians still debate whether the opium trade was primarily driven by the greed of the East India Company or the unyielding demand of Chinese consumers. Who bears the heavier blame, the pusher or the buyer? The scholar's pen wavers on this point, as if reluctant to stab either side too deeply. The city is quieter now. You hear the rhythmic splash of oars as small boats ferry cargo under moonlight. From one of them drifts laughter, the soft, hazy laughter of men already half lost to smoke. You lean against the railing, watching the reflection of the moon ripple in the dark water. The dragon sleeps. Yes, but the fire gathering at its edges is foreign, stoked by men who care little for the empire's dreams. And you breathe in the mingled scents of salt water and burning resin, knowing that Canton, this vibrant artery of trade, is also the place where the empire's heart begins to falter. You probably won't make it through this night without realizing history doesn't collapse all at once. It dissolves slowly, one puff, one coin, one whispered deal at a time. The morning river is busy again, waves chopped by countless oars. Canton feels like it never really sleeps, just dozes lightly, the way a cat does, ears still twitching for the faintest sound of opportunity. You stroll along the dock, where porters in sweat-stained tunics heave crates onto carts. Their muscles gleam in the sun, but you notice something else. The hollow look in a few of their eyes. They move slower, cough harder, and linger near the smoke when they can't. The labor force itself is quietly eroding. One fact, by 1838, official reports estimated that as much as 4,000 tons of opium were entering China each year. That's not a trickle, it's a flood, an ocean of smoke pouring into pipes, across cities and villages, across palaces and fields. Obscure tidbit. Some opium dens decorated their ceilings with mirrored glass so that smokers lying back on couches could watch the smoke curl upward and multiply endlessly. The effect was supposed to feel transcendent, as if you were floating in endless clouds. Reality, you were flat on your back, drooling slightly, while your pockets were emptied. Historians still debate whether the Qing Dynasty might have stemmed the tide by modernizing its navy earlier. Foreign ships, bristling with cannons, rigged with the latest sails, made smuggling almost laughably easy. Could a stronger navy have shut the door? Or was the addiction already too deeply rooted inland for that to matter? You pause at a small street shrine. The incense burns thick, the smoke coiling upward, indistinguishable from the haze you've been walking through. Worshippers bow, their foreheads brushing the stone floor. You wonder how many of them go home to houses where another kind of smoke curls, sweet and heavy, into the rafters. And then you hear the whispers again, his name spreading like rumor, like hope. Lin Zexu, a man said to be incorruptible, a man who doesn't blink at bribes. The empire is stirring, just a little, summoning a champion. The city continues to hum, carts clattering, merchants haggling, boats loading. Life doesn't pause for decline. It just folds it into the rhythm, beat by beat, until the song sounds normal, and you, standing in the middle of it, feel the quiet dread of a melody that will soon crescendo into something louder, something harsher. The sun lowers over Canton, brushing rooftops with bronze. You wander toward the foreign factories again, where flags flutter above tall shutters. The British Union. Jack snaps crisply in the breeze, bold and smug, as if it already knows how the story ends. One fact. In 1839, the Qing Emperor finally entrusted Lin Zexu with full authority to stamp out the opium trade. His mission was clear: cleanse the empire of the poison. His methods, as you'll see, were not subtle. Here's your obscure tidbit. Lin Zexu, before he even set foot in Canton, wrote a famous letter directly to Queen Victoria, appealing to her sense of morality. He asked, in effect, how would you like it if someone sold poison to your people? Historians still chuckle softly at this, because there is no evidence she ever read it. Royal inboxes, it seems, were as messy then as our email spam folders are today. Still, Lin's presence electrified Canton. You feel it in the markets. Nervous merchants lowering their voices, smugglers slipping into alleys, Hong intermediaries sweating through their silks. The smoke hasn't vanished, but it's more cautious now, curling in tighter circles, avoiding the open air. Historians still debate whether Lin's crackdown was too harsh, provoking the foreign powers, or whether anything less would have failed. Was he a savior, making a last heroic stand, or a man swinging too late at a tide that could not be stopped? The debate lingers, as unresolved as the haze in the alleys. That evening, you pass a crowd gathered at the docks. Soldiers are unloading seized crates, stacking them into great wooden mountains. The crowd murmurs, eyes wide, as if watching the empire finally bare its teeth. Somewhere in the pile, the sweet scent leaks out, defiant even in captivity. The river catches the last of the sunlight, glowing red gold. You stand there watching, wondering if this really is the turning point, or just another pause before the storm. You probably won't make it through this night without sensing that the dragon has finally stirred. And dragons, when they wake, do not always roar. Sometimes they burn. The morning mist clings low to the Pearl River, but the docks are already alive with commotion. Soldiers in stiff uniforms march in rhythm, boots thudding against stone. Civilians gather in clusters, whispering, craning their necks toward the great wooden stacks that tower like miniature fortresses. You step closer, and the scent hits you, sweet, pungent, strangely alluring even from a distance. Lin Zexu has arrived. His eyes are sharp, his presence magnetic, in a quiet, immovable way. He's not here to negotiate, he's here to make an example. You watch as laborers and soldiers alike begin the work. Crates are pried open, their contents dumped into ditches dug by the riverbank. Here's your historical fact. In 1839, Lin Zexu ordered the destruction of over 20,000 chests of opium at Human, near Canton. That amounted to roughly 1,200 tons, an unprecedented act of defiance against foreign merchants. And your obscure tidbit, the opium was mixed with lime and salt water before being flushed into the sea. Some locals whispered that fish swam strangely for weeks afterward, as if intoxicated themselves. Whether true or not, the image of drunken carp wobbling through the Pearl River became part of the folklore. Historians still debate whether this massive destruction was a brilliant show of moral authority or a reckless provocation. Was Lin defending the empire's dignity, or simply throwing a match onto a mountain of gunpowder? Opinions diverge, but history suggests the latter. The crowd around you shifts uneasily. Some cheer, clapping their hands as if to applaud the empire's spine stiffening at last. Others frown, calculating the money lost, the livelihoods ruined. Foreign merchants, standing farther back, glare with cold fury. You can almost hear the silent threat in their thoughts. This isn't over. The smoke of destruction hangs over the water, not the sweet haze of addiction, but the acrid sting of protest. You breathe it in, sharpen your throat, and realize that the dragon has indeed woken, but it has chosen to fight with claws, while its enemies wait offshore with cannons. And you, standing there, feel the first vibrations of war beneath your feet. Night falls uneasy. The streets of Canton are quieter than usual, as if holding their breath. Shops close earlier, shutters bang shut, and even the tea houses lose some of their laughter. You wander beneath paper lanterns that flicker nervously in the wind. The empire has struck, but retaliation is coming. Everyone knows it. One fact: Britain, enraged by the destruction of its valuable cargo, prepared to use military force. The First Opium War would erupt within months, sparked less by morality and more by the bottom line of British trade. Your obscure tidbit: in London taverns, some merchants joked bitterly about tea with a dash of lime, a mocking reference to the lime linzexu used to neutralize opium. It was dark humor, the kind only men counting profits can muster while planning war. Historians still debate whether Britain's decision to escalate was inevitable or opportunistic. Was this about defending trade principles, or about seizing the perfect excuse to pry open China's markets by force? The answer, like much of imperial history, depends on who's telling the story. You find yourself at the riverbank again. Ships float like shadows in the dark, their lanterns glowing faintly. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, British warships are already on their way. Hulking beasts of iron and oak, carrying guns that can roar louder than any dragon. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of salt and anticipation. Canton's walls look sturdy under moonlight, but you know better. The Empire's defenses are outdated, its cannons old, its fleets scattered. Against modern European ships, this dragon is out of its depth. You lean against the railing, the Pearl River moving quietly beneath you. It looks calm, almost serene, but you can sense the tide turning. Not the tide of water, but of history. A tide that will not be stopped by proclamations or rituals, by burning incense, or by smashing crates. The night is long, and you probably won't make it through without hearing the whisper of sails unfurling somewhere beyond the horizon. The storm is coming, and it is not subtle. The morning haze drifts across Canton, and you sense an almost artificial calm, like the hush before a storm finally decides it's tired of waiting. Merchants go about their business, but their movements are stiff, their eyes darting toward the harbor. You walk past shopkeepers opening shutters with reluctant hands, as if they'd rather keep their goods tucked safely inside. Even the opera singers seem subdued, their songs carrying less flair, less smoke-soaked bravado. Here's your historical fact. By late 1839, skirmishes between Qing forces and British ships had already broken out along the coast. The Qing, confident in their numbers and in the supposed moral superiority of their cause, underestimated the reach of British naval firepower. And your obscure tidbit: some Cantonese residents, fearful of war, began sewing tiny charms of red cloth to hang from their doors, symbols meant to ward off sea demons, a local nickname for the foreign ships. Sailors on the other side likely never knew that an entire city had spiritually downgraded them to ghost stories. Historians still debate whether the Qing leadership genuinely believed their forces could repel the British, or whether they simply had no choice but to pretend. Pride, after all, can be a weapon, and sometimes it's the only one left. You wander through the market square, the chatter buzzing with rumors. Some say the British will blockade the ports. Others claim they'll march on Beijing itself. A woman selling dumplings shakes her head and mutters that it won't matter. People will always find a way to eat and smoke, no matter who is in charge. Her dumplings, by the way, smell incredible. You buy two, bite into the soft dough, and nearly burn your tongue. Empires may collapse, but impatience is timeless. The day drags on, hot and restless. Near the river, you see soldiers drilling, their movements rigid, their weapons gleaming, but old. The sound of their shouts carries across the water, but the foreign ships anchored just out of sight remain unimpressed, silent, waiting, and you, standing between dumpling steam and military drills, feel the tension coil tighter. The dragon is not roaring yet. It is pacing, restless in its own skin. Night sharpens the edges of Canton. Lanterns flicker along the riverbanks, and the pearl itself seems to glow faintly under the moon. But the ships out at sea, dark silhouettes against the horizon, steal the show. They don't move much, but their very presence feels like a threat. You stand there, squinting at their shapes, and you realize that this is how war often begins. Not with a bang, but with a shadow that refuses to leave. Here's your historical fact. In November 1839, the first real clash of the Opium War erupted at Kowloon, near Hong Kong. British warships easily defeated Qing junks, demonstrating the vast technological gap between the two sides. Your obscure tidbit: some villagers along the southern coast described the British cannons as thunder brought by iron, dragons. They'd never seen shells that exploded on impact, and to them, it seemed like the invaders carried storms in their bellies. Children sketched crude pictures of dragon ships with mouths of fire. Historians still debate whether the war was avoidable at all. Could diplomacy have bridged the Gulf, or were Britain's commercial ambitions and China's refusal to yield destined to collide? Scholars circle the question endlessly, but you, standing here, sense inevitability. Like the tide itself, the city grows quieter as the night deepens. The tea houses are still open, but their laughter is muted, muffled by uncertainty. You step inside one and order a cup. The server pours with a steady hand, though you notice it trembles ever so slightly. Everyone here knows Canton is the front line, and warships don't respect walls. You sip your tea, hot and grounding, as the room hums with whispered conversations. Some say the emperor will send reinforcements. Others claim Britain is too far to sustain a real war. You want to believe them, but then you hear it. The low boom of a cannon firing practice out at sea. Just one, a reminder. The dragon stirs uneasily in its lair, while iron dragons circle outside. And you probably won't make it through this night without realizing that the empire's old rhythms, tea, incense, poetry, and smoke, are about to be drowned out by the pounding rhythm of guns. The dawn feels unsettled, as though the sky itself is reluctant to brighten. You walk through Canton streets, where the usual bustle has been replaced by hurried footsteps and shuttered windows. Even the hawkers seem subdued, their voices lower, their prices less flexible. Fear, it turns out, is terrible for haggling. Here's your historical fact. When British ships engaged Qing defenses in early encounters, the results were devastatingly lopsided. Chinese junks, armed with outdated cannons that fired stone or low-grade iron balls, stood little chance against modern British warships with long-range, precise artillery. And your obscure tidbit: in some southern villages, residents believed tying live ducks to the sides of junks would protect them in battle. The ducks' quacks supposedly confused enemy spirits. It's hard not to smile at the thought of bewildered sailors staring at a flotilla of quacking war junks before being blasted out of the water. Historians still debate whether the Qing Dynasty's technological stagnation was caused more by deliberate isolationism or by sheer bureaucratic inertia. Was it a conscious choice to ignore innovation, or did the machinery of empire simply grow too slow to adapt? You turn a corner and see a column of Qing soldiers. Their armor glints in the pale morning light, but it looks ceremonial, more suited for parades than naval warfare. They march stiffly, their banners bright, their voices loud. Pride is there, yes, but you notice the nervous glances they share when the distant thunder of a cannon rolls across the harbor. The people of Canton spill into temples. You pass one crowded with worshippers, pressing incense sticks into sand-filled urns. The smoke is thick, rising in frantic curls. Prayers rise too, some for victory, some for survival. You pause, bow lightly, and let the heat of the incense sting your eyes. Outside, the Pearl River gleams with the morning sun. British ships are visible now, their sails taut, their cannons lined like teeth. They don't rush. They don't need to. The calm before a storm is its own form of intimidation. You stand on the bank, watching the horizon. Dumpling steam and incense smoke, tangled with the faint smell of powder. The dragon is awake, but its claws feel dull against iron. And you? You probably won't make it through this day without hearing the first sharp cracks of war. By nightfall, the storm breaks. You're on the riverbank when the first flashes streak the horizon. Orange bursts, tearing across the dark. The sound follows, a rolling thunder that rattles windows and makes your bones hum. British warships fire in calculated rhythm, their shells slicing through the air. Here's your historical fact. In one of the early battles, British gunnery could hit targets from more than a mile away, while Qing cannons barely reached half that distance with any accuracy. The imbalance was so great that the British sometimes destroyed entire fleets without taking a single casualty. Your obscure tidbit: some Qing soldiers went into battle wearing brightly painted talismans tucked into their armor, small slips of paper inscribed with charms to ward off foreign bullets. Sadly, paper is notoriously bad at stopping iron. Historians still debate whether Qing commanders genuinely misunderstood the scale of British firepower, or whether they simply told the emperor what he wanted to hear. It is one thing to underestimate an enemy, it is another to lie upward out of fear. The river explodes in light. You see junks splinter as cannonballs crash into their sides. Wood and fire raining into the water. Men scream, but the sound is swallowed by the roar of guns. The foreign ships barely move, steady as floating fortresses, while the Chinese vessels scatter, some catching fire, others sinking beneath the waves. On shore, civilians cry out. Families clutch their children, rushing away from the docks. Shops slam shut. You press against a wall, the shockwaves rolling through your chest. War doesn't feel like glory. It feels like chaos and smoke, confusion wrapped in terror. Through the haze, you catch sight of a temple bell swinging, struck again and again, not for prayer this time, but for alarm. Its tolls echo through the city, a sound older than the empire's troubles, yet suddenly helpless against modern war. And you, heart thudding in time with the cannon fire, realize this is no mere clash of trade interests. This is the sound of an empire's skin tearing open. You probably won't make it through this night without carrying that sound. The booming reminder that the dragon has met a foe it cannot outbreathe. Morning creeps reluctantly over Canton, the sunlight filtering through smoke that still lingers in the air. The battle has subsided, But the city does not exhale. You walk along the riverfront, where shattered planks and burned debris wash up on the banks. Fishermen poke at the wreckage with long poles, pulling up charred wood, and occasionally a waterlogged sandal. The Pearl River, once a proud artery of trade, now carries splinters of defeat. Here's your historical fact. The early engagements of the First Opium War proved humiliating for the Qing Navy. In one skirmish at Chunpi, British forces destroyed or captured nearly all opposing junks, while suffering negligible losses themselves. Obscure tidbit. Locals claimed that after the battles, the water near Canton turned oily, not only from gunpowder residue, but from melted wax seals once used on the opium chests. Children dared each other to scoop it up with bamboo cups, though elders warned it was cursed. Historians still debate whether Qing generals truly believed their armies could compensate for naval weakness, or whether they were already aware that land battles would fare no better. Some argue that the court clung to numbers, convinced that sheer population would overwhelm foreign tactics. But history rarely rewards quantity without quality. You make your way to a market square, quieter than usual. Stalls are open, but the merchants seem distracted. Their eyes turned toward the river, even as they count coins. A butcher chops pork with sharp precision, yet his face is pale, his rhythm faster than it should be. Nearby, a dumpling vendor stirs broth without tasting it. The war has entered the city's rhythm, souring even the simplest acts. At the edge of the square, you spot soldiers repairing their gear. Their armor is dented, their flags scorched. They sit in silence, patching cloth, sharpening spears that feel almost symbolic now. The bravado of yesterday has dimmed into something more fragile, determination shaded with fear. The dragon still lives, but its scales are chipped, its breath shaky, and you, wandering between broken planks and broken spirits, understand that Canton is no longer just a trade hub. It has become a battlefield, and the Empire's heart now beats under siege. Night falls, but rest does not. You wander through the narrow alleys of Canton, where lanterns flicker nervously against damp walls. The city feels tense, every sound amplified. The creak of shutters, the splash of oars, the soft murmur of families huddled inside. Here's your historical fact. Following Lin Sexu's crackdown and the British retaliation, fighting spread quickly along the coast. By 1840, the British Navy had imposed blockades on key ports, cutting deep into China's maritime trade. Your obscure tidbit: Cantonese storytellers, those who once performed heroic epics in tea houses, now improvised new verses about iron ships that spat fire. Some tales claimed the ships were invulnerable because their crews had struck pacts with sea spirits. It was a way of making sense of the incomprehensible. Historians still debate whether the Qing court in Beijing fully grasped the seriousness of events in Canton. Some records suggest the emperor believed the war was a local disturbance that would pass quickly. Others imply he knew, but chose denial, wrapped in layers of comforting reports from officials eager to avoid blame. You find yourself in a small tea shop near the city wall. The room is dim, the tables crowded with anxious faces. Men whisper over cups of steaming leaves, their conversations fractured. Rumors of reinforcements, of foreign demands, of merchants ruined overnight. The air tastes of tea, salt, and fear. From the open door, you glimpse the river, Lanterns bob on the water as patrol boats drift, their shadows thin against the bulk of foreign ships anchored farther out. The sight is haunting, like minnows circling sharks. A gust of wind rattles the shutters. The shopkeeper curses softly, then laughs at his own nerves. Everyone chuckles with him, the way people do when humor is the only weapon left. You join in, though the laughter fades quickly, leaving the silence heavier than before. The dragon curls tighter in its lair, the fire in its throat smothered by uncertainty. And you, sipping your tea in that dim room, know you probably won't make it through this night without sensing that Canton's story is no longer its own. Larger forces have taken the script, and the Empire is now playing a part it never auditioned for. The dawn light filters weakly through Canton's haze, and you walk along streets that feel both familiar and changed. Children still dart through alleys, their laughter quick and bright, but their games now mimic war. One boy shouts that he's a British gunship, puffing his cheeks and roaring like a cannon, while another waves a stick, claiming to be a Qing soldier with charms that make him bulletproof. Their mothers scold them sharply, but you see the worry in their eyes. Play has become prophecy. Here's your historical fact. In 1840, British forces sailed north to threaten the coast near Tianjin, dangerously close to Beijing itself. It wasn't just Canton anymore. The empire's very capital trembled. Obscure tidbit. During these tense months, some Cantonese households began burning tea leaves as incense, believing the fragrant smoke would drive away foreign spirits. A poetic act of defiance, sacrificing China's most treasured export to ward off the very men who craved it most. Historians still debate whether the Qing court could have negotiated peace before the conflict spread so far. Was it stubborn pride that dragged the empire deeper, or did Britain's demands make compromise impossible? The answers ripple like the river, shifting with every telling. You turn a corner and see a group of scholars gathered outside a hall, their voices sharp. They argue not about opium or cannons, but about heaven's mandate. If the empire is suffering defeat, they say, does it mean the emperor has lost heaven's favor? A dangerous question, whispered louder than before. You pass quietly, feeling the weight of words sharper than swords. At the docks, the air is heavy with silence. Boats sit idle, cargo untouched. Fishermen complain of empty nets, merchants of empty purses. Even the gulls seem fewer, as if war has driven them to quieter shores. The dragon is restless, smoke coiling in its throat, but its wings feel bound by ritual and pride. And you, watching the city pause mid-breath, realize Canton is no longer just a city under threat. It has become the mirror in which the entire empire sees its fragility. The night comes thick and hot, pressing against the city walls like a second skin. You find yourself near the old gate, where watchfires burn low, and soldiers huddle in small groups, muttering. Their armor glints dully, their spears stacked nearby. One man sharpens a blade with slow, deliberate strokes, but his eyes stare past the steel, unfocused. Here's your historical fact. In 1841, British troops captured key coastal forts, including those guarding the Baka-Tigris Strait near Canton. With these gates forced open, the road into southern China lay exposed. And your obscure tidbit, some villagers, watching the foreign advance, began crafting little paper boats filled with rice and setting them afloat on rivers. The offerings were meant for drowned spirits, both Chinese and foreign, so they wouldn't linger angrily among the living. By the end of the year, rivers shimmered with ghostly flotillas of paper. Historians still debate whether the Qing Dynasty's centralized bureaucracy crippled its response to the war. Decisions crawled through layers of officials, each afraid to deliver bad news. By the time action was ordered, the enemy had often already moved on. Was it structure that doomed them, or fear? You lean against the stone wall of the gate, feeling the warmth of the day still radiating from its bricks. From beyond the city, the faint boom of cannons carries again, echoing over the hills. The sound is distant, but the city reacts anyway. Dogs bark, babies cry, shutters slam. Above you, the stars glitter, indifferent. The Pearl River gleams faintly in the moonlight, a long silver scar cutting through the land. It once brought trade, poetry, and wealth. Now it carries smoke, rumors, and war. The dragon breathes unevenly, its scales scorched, its wings tethered. It shifts in its sleep, but each stir feels weaker. And you, standing in the night's heavy air, know you probably won't make it through without hearing the truth that no one dares to say aloud. The war is no longer about Canton. It is about the empire itself, and the cracks spreading from its heart. The day begins with a haze that is part mist, part smoke, part imagination. You walk through Canton's narrow alleys, where the chatter has shifted from the price of rice to the price of survival. A barber sweeps hair from his doorway, muttering that business has slowed because men would rather grow their hair long than waste coins when war may take them tomorrow. Here's your historical fact. In early 1841, after a series of defeats, the Qing agreed to the Convention of Trenpi, which would have ceded Hong Kong to Britain. Yet the treaty was never fully ratified, leaving both sides frustrated and the conflict unresolved. Obscure tidbit. When news spread that the foreigners might claim Hong Kong, some Cantonese residents laughed bitterly, calling it a barren rock good for lizards. They could not imagine it becoming one of the world's busiest ports. Irony, it seems, ages well. Historians still debate whether Qing negotiators like Qishan, who signed the preliminary agreement, were acting pragmatically to save lives or cowardly in surrender. Was compromise wisdom or weakness? The ink of history is never without smudges. You pause by a riverside tea shop. Its walls are patched with bamboo mats, its tables uneven, yet it hums with the nervous life of men pretending to be calm. One man insists the foreigners will leave once silver runs dry. Another says they'll never leave because silver isn't what they want. It's the empire's doors. The tea tastes bitter, as though steeped in fear. Outside, the docks lie strangely still. Ships rock idly, sails furled, crews subdued. A hawker tries half-heartedly to sell candied hawthorn sticks, their glossy red dulled by the morning gloom. You buy one, if only for the sharpness of the fruit, the reminder that something sweet still lingers in the world. The dragon stirs restlessly, its scales brushed with humiliation, its tail tangled in negotiations that solve nothing. And you, licking syrup from your fingers, realize Canton is now suspended between war and peace, like a coin spinning in the air, waiting to land. The night presses close, humid and restless. You drift toward the foreign factories, their shutters drawn, but voices audible inside. English, Portuguese, French, muffled laughter, the clink of glasses, even in the shadow of war. The merchants drink, calculating profits over candlelight. Here's your historical fact. When the convention of Twentby collapsed, fighting resumed almost immediately. British troops captured forts and advanced inland, while Qing officials scrambled to reassert authority they had already lost. Obscure tidbit: foreign sailors stationed near Canton sometimes bought pet monkeys from local traders, teaching them to mimic salutes or smoke pipes for entertainment. Picture it: a half-drunk sailor cheering as a monkey wobbles with an opium pipe, while beyond the walls, real men die for smoke and pride. Historians still debate whether the Qing court's refusal to ratify the treaty was born of principle or simple miscommunication. Did the emperor genuinely reject its terms, or did the bureaucracy muddle them into dust? Either way, clarity was a casualty long before gunfire resumed. You pause near the riverbank, listening to the water lap against stone. The Pearl River is darker now, not from night alone, but from the weight of ships. Chinese patrol boats outmatched by looming foreign vessels. Their lanterns glow like patient predators' eyes. The people of Canton have grown quieter. Families eat in silence, doors barred, ears tuned for distant cannon fire. Even the opera stages have dimmed. The colorful masks hang untouched, their painted grins mocking the sorrow around them. You breathe in the night air, thick with damp and dread. The dragon lies bleeding, its voice caught in its throat, yet still too proud to admit defeat. And you probably won't make it through this night without realizing that wars rarely end neatly. They stumble, drag on, and unravel like a frayed rope, leaving everyone tangled, even those who never touched the knot. Morning filters in with a weary sort of light, as if the sun itself is tired of watching the spectacle. You step into Canton's market, and though the stalls are open, their voices are subdued. Dried fish hangs limp, spices sit unshaken, and bolts of cloth seem less vibrant than they once did. Even the scales at the money changers feel quieter, their metallic clink carrying the dullness of uncertainty. Here's your historical fact. In 1841, the British advanced farther, capturing the strategic city of Ningbo. The war had spread beyond Canton, and suddenly, entire stretches of coastline were under foreign control. Your obscure tidbit: Ningbo residents, faced with occupation, reportedly nicknamed the British soldiers red-haired ghosts, not just for their appearance, but for their uncanny discipline in battle. The term stuck, though ghosts, it turned out, carried very real muskets. Historians still debate whether the Qing Empire could have fought a defensive war inland rather than at sea. Could fortresses and sheer manpower have turned the tide if the battlefield had shifted away from the coast? Or was the empire already too fractured, its supply lines too strained, its officials too distracted by silver shortages and court intrigues? You bite into a steamed bun from a vendor. Soft dough, savory pork, a small reminder that life continues, even under the shadow of defeat. The vendor shrugs when you ask how business is. People eat less when they're scared, he mutters. Fear, it seems, has a way of tightening more than just throats. At the docks, workers sit idle, watching the horizon where smoke still rises. Their hands are calloused, strong, but useless against the cannons. A man spits into the water, muttering curses at the ships he can barely see. His spit vanishes instantly, swallowed by the pearl. The dragon limps now, forced to spread its body thin, fighting battles up and down the coast. Its scales crack under pressure, its eyes cloud with exhaustion, and you, tasting pork and smoke together, realize that Canton is no longer just threatened. It is abandoned to a larger chessboard where the pieces move beyond its walls. Night deepens over Canton, warm and heavy, the kind of night where the air feels thick enough to drink. You wander toward the city walls, where torches flicker, their flames small against the immensity of the dark. Soldiers pace the ramparts, their silhouettes weary, their armor catching faint glints. Here's your historical fact. In January 1841, British forces assaulted and captured the Bogue forts at the mouth of the Pearl River. These defenses, considered the key to protecting Canton, fell in hours. The city's gateway was wide open. Your obscure tidbit. After the fall of the forts, Cantonese opera performers began slipping coded criticisms of the war into their songs. One character might complain about foreign devils stealing tea, another about corrupt officials who love silver more than the people. Audiences caught the hints, laughing nervously, while soldiers pretended not to hear. Historians still debate whether the Bogue forts were doomed from outdated design alone or from poor leadership in their defense. Some suggest that the defenders fought bravely but hopelessly, others that they panicked, fleeing before the first volleys landed. The truth likely lies, as usual, somewhere in the fog of gunpowder. You rest your hands on the warm stone of the wall, looking out toward the river. The British fleet looms in the distance, lanterns glowing like a second constellation. The Pearl ripples quietly, deceptively calm beneath the weight of warships. Inside the city, life adjusts in strange ways. A baker closes his shop earlier each evening, not because he has fewer customers, but because flour deliveries arrive erratically. A physician stocks more herbs for treating burns and wounds, less for fevers and coughs. Even daily routines bend under the gravity of foreign cannons. The dragon exhales slowly, its breath uneven, its pride scorched. Smoke curls from its nostrils, but its fire feels weak, its heart weary. And you, leaning on those walls under the humid night sky, know you probably won't make it through without sensing the bitter truth. The gates of Canton are open, and nothing inside feels safe anymore. Morning drags itself into Canton with a gray heaviness, the kind of light that makes everything look tired. You walk along the riverbank where the water moves sluggishly, carrying bits of driftwood and the occasional shard of wreckage from battles upstream. Fishermen still cast their nets, though fewer return with anything worth selling. Some shrug, muttering that even the fish are fleeing the war. Here's your historical fact. After the fall of the Bogue forts in 1841, British forces pressed toward Canton itself, demanding payment and compliance from Qing officials. The city teetered on the edge of occupation, though its people clung to daily routines, as if they could hold back history with rice bowls and incense. Your obscure tidbit, rumors spread that the British had invented a kind of fire-breathing tea, a brew that gave them their stamina in battle. Locals whispered that maybe it was just coffee, smuggled from Southeast Asia, but the mystery gave it a supernatural aura. The joke, of course, was that the empire was losing to men who simply drank too much caffeine. Historians still debate whether the Qing officials in Canton were genuinely negotiating in good faith or merely stalling for time. hoping reinforcements would arrive. Some argue they were desperate to protect the city's wealth, while others suggest they knew the city could not be saved at all. In the market, vendors are cautious but open. A woman sells sesame cakes, the aroma warm and nutty, but she presses them into your hands with a warning, eat fast. The soldiers might come for them. You take a bite anyway. The crisp sweetness is almost defiant, proof that small pleasures persist even in collapse. Children run barefoot through the alleys, but their games mimic the war. One holds a stick like a rifle, another shouts like a cannon, their laughter echoing strangely against silent walls. Adults glance nervously, but say nothing. Play, after all, is a rehearsal for what they already expect. The dragon crouches low, tail coiled, wings clipped, forced into bargaining, while enemies circle overhead. And you, chewing sesame and smoke together, feel the uneasy truth. Canton is negotiating for its life, and no one believes the promises will last. Night gathers, with a weight that feels thicker than the humid air. You find yourself near the governor's compound, where torches burn bright and shadows stretch long across the courtyard. Messengers scurry in and out, their silk robes soaked with sweat, their scrolls tucked tightly against their chests. Here's your historical fact. In May 1841, the British attacked Canton directly, but halted before occupying it completely, choosing instead to extort ransom payments. King officials agreed to pay large sums of silver to keep the city nominally intact. It was survival by coin, rather than cannon. Your obscure tidbit. Some Cantonese residents grumbled that the ransom payments were cursed money, that silver touched by foreign hands would sour fortunes. A few shopkeepers refused such coins outright, though hunger eventually forced most to accept them. Historians still debate whether this decision to ransom rather than occupy Canton showed British restraint or simple pragmatism. Was it mercy to leave the city standing, or merely convenience to avoid the burden of ruling it? Either way, the lesson was clear. Money could delay ruin, but not stop it. From your spot beneath the compound's outer wall, you hear fragments of anxious voices, arguments about numbers, about dignity, about what the emperor will think. Somewhere within, a clerk shouts that the treasury cannot afford another ounce of silver, but his voice is smothered by the next order barked in reply. The people outside hear whispers too. Some say the city is safe for now. Others that British ships plan to return in greater force. Families light incense at doorways, muttering prayers into the smoke. The air smells of ash, salt, and fear. You step away from the compound, wandering back toward the river. The lanterns of British ships flicker faintly offshore, like predators blinking in the dark. The Pearl River reflects them in ripples, as though mocking Canton with double visions of danger. The dragon lowers its head, silver chains at its throat, forced to breathe shallowly, while its enemies grin from the horizon. And you, feeling the weight of silver you don't carry, probably won't make it through this night without realizing sometimes survival tastes worse than defeat. The morning hum of Canton is quieter now, as though the city itself is trying not to draw attention. You wander through streets that once rang with hawkers' cries and the clang of metal workers, but now you hear mostly the shuffle of feet and the low murmur of cautious conversations. Life hasn't stopped. It never does. But it has learned to move softly under the shadow of foreign guns. Here's your historical fact. By 1842, the war had dragged on for nearly 3 years. stretching across China's coast. The British advanced from Canton to Amoy, Ningbo, and eventually threatened Shanghai. Each city fell in turn, exposing how little the Qing could defend its vast territory. Your obscure tidbit. In Ningbo, some residents reportedly threw their chamber pots onto the heads of British soldiers during the occupation. It wasn't effective, but it was something. A messy protest against humiliation. Historians still debate whether the Qing leadership could have mobilized local militias more effectively, harnessing sheer manpower against the smaller British force. Was it a failure of will, of organization, or simply of imagination? Numbers alone, after all, don't win wars. They need direction. At a Canton tea house, you sip from a chipped porcelain cup. The room is filled with scholars, merchants, and even a few silent soldiers. Conversations circle the same topics: rising silver payments, dwindling food supplies, and rumors of more ports being pried open by force. One old man sighs and says that the empire is like a bamboo mat fraying at the edges, still wide, still present, but unraveling thread by thread. On the streets, you see new faces, refugees from other cities, carrying bundles, clutching children, their eyes hollow from travel. Canton absorbs them quietly, but you can feel the city sag under the weight. The dragon curls tighter, wings bound, body shrinking under siege. Its once mighty roar has become a wheeze, audible only to those close enough to hear. And you, watching tea steam curl into the rafters, realize Canton is no longer just surviving. It is bracing, waiting for the next demand, the next humiliation, the next coin-shaped wound. Night presses down, warm and heavy, but Canton does not sleep easily. You drift through alleys where lanterns swing restlessly, their light trembling against damp walls. From houses, you catch the glow of oil lamps and the faint curls of opium smoke, proof that even in war, the habit lingers like a second invasion. Here's your historical fact. In 1842, with British forces advancing northward, the Qing had little choice but to sue for peace. The war's exhaustion was evident everywhere. Treasuries drained, soldiers demoralized, civilians caught in endless cycles of fear and loss. Your obscure tidbit. Some wealthy families in Canton began burying silver in their courtyards, convinced that the earth would protect their fortunes better than any governor. Digging became almost comical. Gardens full of shallow pits, neighbors suspicious of one another, all hoping the soil would outwit foreign demands. Historians still debate whether the emperor's court understood how final the coming treaty would be. Did they realize they were about to sign away more than just land and trade rights? Or did they imagine it as another temporary concession, one among many, not the opening of a century-long wound? The city murmurs in its unease. At the docks, you hear sailors sing low, mournful songs, half lullaby, half lament. A child clings to his mother's robe, staring wide-eyed at the lanterns across the river. A dog barks, then falls silent, as if it too senses the weight pressing in from the horizon. You step into a small courtyard where incense burns, sweet and thick. A woman bows deeply before a shrine, whispering prayers for peace. Though her voice trembles, the smoke rises, indistinguishable from the haze of war that lingers everywhere. The dragon shifts in the dark, weary from wounds. Its fire nearly gone, it dreams now of survival, not victory. And you, standing in that courtyard, probably won't make it through this night without realizing that the empire is about to wake into a world reshaped forever. The city outside your curtain begins to soften. The shouts from the tavern have turned into mutters, laughter replaced by hiccups and snores. A cart rumbles past, its wheels echoing in the dawn-tinged streets. Even the dogs seem tired, curling into doorways, tails twitching in their sleep. You sit with your back against the cool wall, listening. The silence feels heavy, as though even the air is reluctant to move. Canton waits. It has been waiting for years, for reinforcements, for miracles, for the empire to remember its southern gates. None have come. Here's your historical fact. In August 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed aboard a British warship. It forced China to cede Hong Kong, open 5 treaty ports, including Canton, to foreign trade, and pay an indemnity of 21 million silver dollars. It was the first of the so-called unequal treaties. Your obscure tidbit: British officers celebrated the treaty by toasting with champagne on deck. Meanwhile, Cantonese dock workers muttered that the treaty was cursed because it had been signed over water, a bad omen since water was believed to carry misfortune wherever it flowed. Historians still debate whether the Qing court understood the treaty's full scope. Did the emperor think it was a temporary humiliation? Or did he realize it was the beginning of a long unraveling? Some argue he was resigned. Others believe denial was the only comfort left. You rise and walk to the window. Outside, the Pearl River lies flat and gleaming, like polished metal. On its surface, ships glide with quiet arrogance, sails trimmed neatly, lanterns glowing faintly. They no longer need to roar. Victory has given them silence. The dragon exhales slowly, its body stretched across mountains and rivers, but its heart heavy with chains. It has not died, but it has been bound, forced to live on terms it did not choose. And you, watching the pale dawn rise over Canton, realize the waiting is over. The empire has signed away its dignity, and the city is now part of a world that will never again look the same. The city exhales as dawn finally claims it. Light creeps into the alleyways, pale and golden, brushing against the stones with soft fingers. The tavern above has fallen nearly silent, its benches empty, its mugs abandoned. Rome itself seems to sigh, easing into the quieter rhythm of morning. After a long night, you lie back on the straw mattress, letting your body sink into its uneven surface. The sounds of Canton seep into your ears, the faint splash of oars, the muffled calls of merchants beginning their day, the sigh of wind through paper lanterns. It all feels distant now, softened by the weight of history pressing gently against your chest. Here's your historical fact. The Treaty of Nanking marked the true sabre, beginning of what historians call the century of humiliation, a period when foreign powers would carve into China's sovereignty again and again. Your obscure tidbit: after the treaty, some Cantonese shopkeepers hung upside-down characters for fortune on their doors, normally a playful way of saying fortune arrives. In this context, it was bitter. Fortune, it seemed, had arrived for the foreigners, not for them. Historians still debate whether the Opium War was avoidable. Was it greed that doomed the empire, arrogance, or simply the clash of two worlds on different timelines of technology and ambition? The questions remain open, like a wound that refuses to scar. The dragon lies coiled now, breathing faintly, watching its skies fill with sails it cannot command. Its fire is not gone, but banked low, waiting for another age. And you, closing your eyes, feeling the weight of smoke and silver, of treaties and ships, you let the story fade into the distance. The wind softens, the city quiets, the river glides without hurry. You feel your body grow heavy, sinking deeper into stillness. The voices of merchants and soldiers, of rulers and rebels, drift farther away, like echoes down a long corridor. Your breathing slows. The Pearl River becomes a lullaby, its ripples carrying you farther into calm. The dragon curls into dreams, its scales shimmering faintly in the last glow of dawn. And you too drift now, through smoke, through silence, through centuries. History closes its eyes beside you. Sleep comes gently, like a treaty you do not need to sign. Rest, traveler. The story is over.